So one of the things that I've learned by studying Spanish by myself and learning it very quickly. In order to learn quick, I took every angle. Like I started. Uh, I mean, from every single angle. I mean, I learned grammars. I bought books in Spanish and started reading. I had like 3, 4 different Spanish dictionaries. I I went to a conversation group so that I can practice, and I did everything I could think of. I printed all the Spanish verb conjugations, so that I had this thick printout of full conjugation chart that I carried, and whenever I have time, looked at it, and I bought the book in Japan, which was Japanese, book talking about Spanish, but I learned a lot about Spanish grammar from the book, and at the same time, it came with a CD, so I just kept listening for the better pronunciation, right? And then the good news was Spanish pronunciation was actually not so difficult for Japanese people for whatever reason. Our languages are very different, but it happened to be typically Japanese learning Spanish language relatively have a perfect pronunciation, and on the other side, on the other end, for Japanese, English language is very difficult to pronounce, and I did a lot of things. But I did a lot of things, but one of the, I think, key thing to learn language I found is to really, whatever you do in order to learn the language, you better make connections, meaning like when you practice, you play some kind of a role would make it happen, like connections. Like you play a role of your, being tourist, or being a store manager, or store attendant, or a teacher, or a student, or people who are looking for things or direction. And by doing so, you can make a better connection to what you're learning. And I really truly, when I truly experienced that was actually when I was reading a book, because I knew, I didn't want to start reading a book until later, right? I just actually bought a Spanish edition of my favorite Japanese author. I bought the book from the beginning when I decided to learn Spanish. And at the same time I was studying grammar, I opened that book. I bought that book because I knew that would be easier because I read that book in Japanese language. So basically, reading translated version of that same book would be easier. That was my thought, but it wasn't just easier, but because I knew that book and the great book and the great story and great writing by my favorite author, and when I start reading in Spanish, I bet, of course, they have great translators, but I could read and I could hear the voice of same author, the same way he writes. I could read and I could hear in my head his voice speaking, the same story, in Spanish. So that was, I thought, great way to make a connection with the new language that you were learning through your favorite author. You know, the how he speak, how he writes, the language of his writing, not language of Japanese or Spanish, but you know, his writing style, his speaking style. That you know, through that, I have a great connection with the Spanish language that I was learning, and so that I wanted to talk about today, and so of course, I would recommend anyone who wants to start learning Spanish, you must have one favorite book. You know, anything can work. It can be novel or it can be a business book or whatever. Your favorite. It has to be your favorite. You have read in English before, and so most of the books, and if it's novel, this is more true, and in business book as well, there is always Spanish edition, translated edition of the same book, and typically if it's you know, a big publisher, they always have really good translator, so it really helps you to connect what you are learning, because there is something more to it, right? Like, it's not just a direct translation. It has a meaning to it, of course, but it's the voice of your favorite author or artist or a people. So that's the big connection piece that you can get and implement into your study and practicing. So this is one of the key things that I can give away. I mean, I want to give away everything, but there are so many. So today I want to give away this thing that, in my case, my favorite author was a Japanese writer. His name is Haruki Murakami, and his books, I read so many books of his, and actually, oh, okay, so sorry about that, I forgot, but like before I actually read his book in Spanish, I read his, because I was fascinated by his book, so I read it in English. I think that's what it was, but that's how I found that reading, maybe try to read Spanish. I was trying to remember why I, you know, found that. I mean, this is like, you know, it's almost like a method, like, you know, how to be a good learner, efficient learner of new language. And one of the things is, you know, like I said, whatever language you learn, you get the translated version of your favorite author that you've already read. And that's a part, not one of the a way to have a better connection, like I said. So I was trying to remember how did I figure that out, but yeah, and Haruki Murakami's books, I've read many in, of course, his original Japanese, you know, book, but also I've read English translated version, and I also read Spanish translated version, and that really helped accelerate my Spanish learning speed. And I wanted to tell you that. And also, the other thing that I think it would help is, and this can be happen later, because what I'm going to tell you is that to read some books written originally in Spanish, so to speak. So I was saying that to read my favorite Japanese author's book in translated version made a really great connection to the language for me, so that was helping. But another thing that I did and you should do, but this is probably more difficult because you haven't, I was gonna say you haven't read it, but you might actually have read it, right? For example, let me see how if I have one. Yeah. So what I did was another thing. What I did was because I knew, for example, I cannot come up with a great example right now, but I've read some books in Japanese translation, right? And when I, this was before I was, started studying Spanish, but I wanted to read in original language in English. So that's what I've done so many times, and that actually was very interesting experience, and it probably something made me realize this is a great way to study language. But what I did for Spanish was immediately, and just like I bought like Spanish translated version of Haruki Murakami, immediately I bought like a Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This is a Colombian Spanish writer, Nobel Prize writer, but I bought this because I really wanted to read some great author, great writing in Spanish, and something that was written in Spanish as original, right? Because if I read a translated version of Haruki Murakami, it is only a translated version. Although that was great because it was great translation, that actually I could actually feel original writer's language, right? So that was a great translation, but at the same time, you want to tackle on some great writing in, or in original Spanish language. So that was about it, and I hope you can do the same and enjoy the new language, because learning new language is really like widen the angle of your perspective. It's really something like that. Nobody could really describe very well, but this is just like that. Like, it opens up so much understanding of the, I don't want to say just simply the world, but I can define and to describe in better way. So I hope you enjoyed, and then you can do the same and enjoy reading.